At a busy dinner table, everyone laughs, but you laugh a second late because you caught the words without fully catching the sentence. That delay may feel like a memory problem. Sometimes the strain begins earlier, before memory ever receives a clean message to store. Your brain can only work with the information that reaches it, and when sound becomes incomplete, it must spend extra attention reconstructing missing pieces. This is the first important distinction. A brain can feel slower because its processing system is failing, or because its input has become harder to decode. Those two problems feel similar from the inside, yet they require very different responses. Brain aging is often discussed as if one organ simply wears down on its own. In reality, thinking depends on a network of supporting systems outside the brain itself. Some deliver information, some deliver blood, some create useful demand, and others restore the system while you sleep. Protecting those supports does not guarantee that cognitive decline will never occur, but it changes several risks that are actually within reach. The first of 7 is hearing, because conversation is one of the most demanding cognitive exercises people perform without calling it exercise. In a quiet room, mild hearing loss may remain almost invisible. Add several voices, a television or restaurant noise, and the missing frequencies become much harder to replace. The brain begins predicting words from fragments, watching faces more closely, holding unfinished sentences in working memory, and checking whether its guess makes sense. That compensation is clever, but it is not free. Attention spent decoding sound cannot be spent as efficiently on meaning, memory, and response. This helps explain why someone may remember a conversation poorly, even though the problem began with the signal entering the ear. Memory is not a camera. Information must first be noticed clearly, and attention spent guessing one word may allow the next sentence to arrive before the first is understood. Untreated hearing difficulty can also make conversation exhausting, encouraging a person to speak less or leave early. Degraded input has now created both cognitive load and social withdrawal. The practical response is not to assume that every missed word means dementia. It is to notice whether speech is becoming difficult in noise, whether the television volume keeps rising, or whether family members sound as if they mumble. A proper hearing assessment can separate an ear problem from a thinking problem, and hearing treatment may be especially useful for older adults already at greater risk of cognitive decline. A major randomized trial found no universal cognitive benefit, but higher-risk participants experienced slower decline after hearing treatment, while gaining clearer access to conversation. That is a complete brain protection principle. Improve the quality of the signal before blaming the system that must interpret it. If this kind of explanation helps you make sense of your body, subscribe to Feynman's Body Code and tell me your age and country in the comments. Clear information is valuable, but even a perfect signal becomes useless when the tissue receiving it is poorly supplied. The second protection is vascular, because the brain is active tissue with a continuous demand for oxygen and glucose. It represents only a small fraction of body weight, yet its cells depend on an uninterrupted circulation that reaches through an enormous network of small vessels. High blood pressure can damage that network gradually, long before a person notices a dramatic neurological event. Large vessels matter, but so do the tiny vessels that nourish the white matter connecting one brain region to another. When those connections accumulate damage, the first change may not be forgetting a name. It may be slower planning, weaker attention, or difficulty switching between tasks. White matter is sometimes compared with wiring, but the comparison is incomplete. These pathways are living tissue supplied by vessels, and their efficiency depends on the condition of that supply. Damage can accumulate in scattered areas rather than one dramatic location, which helps explain why the result may appear as generalized slowing instead of one obvious lost ability. This is why brain protection and heart protection cannot be separated neatly after 60. Blood pressure, blood sugar, smoking, cholesterol, and physical inactivity all influence the environment in which brain tissue must operate. The goal is not to drive blood pressure as low as possible on your own. Older adults differ, medications interact, and dizziness or falls can appear when treatment is inappropriate. The useful step is knowing your actual pattern, taking prescribed treatment consistently, and discussing targets with a clinician who understands your health and medications. Home readings are most useful when the cuff fits, the arm is supported, the body has rested, and several readings are recorded under similar conditions. That pattern can reveal persistent elevation or large variation that a single hurried measurement may miss, without encouraging you to adjust medication by yourself. Sprint Mind provides an important example of why this matters. In selected adults with hypertension, more intensive blood pressure treatment reduced mild cognitive impairment, although the evidence for preventing dementia was less certain. That distinction is more useful than a grand promise. Vascular care does not make the brain young overnight. It reduces years of repeated injury to the tissue you're trying to preserve. Think of it as protecting the roads between brain regions. Memory, judgment, and movement all suffer when messages must travel through damaged routes. The third protection begins when you ask those routes to carry more traffic through purposeful movement. Exercise is often sold as a way to burn calories, but the brain experiences it as a coordinated demand involving circulation, balance, vision, timing, and motor control. A walk increases blood flow and aerobic demand. Strength training asks the nervous system to recruit muscle fibers. Balance work forces rapid correction from the feet, eyes, and inner ear. These are not interchangeable benefits, which is why one comfortable activity repeated forever may stop providing a meaningful challenge. Aerobic work mainly challenges sustained delivery. Resistance work challenges force production and recruitment. Balance and coordination challenge error detection and correction. The categories overlap, but naming their different jobs prevents the common mistake of expecting one familiar walk to maintain every physical ability. The answer is not punishing exercise. It is a weekly pattern that gives the brain more than one kind of problem to solve. Moderate aerobic activity can raise breathing and heart rate while still allowing conversation. Resistance work can involve machines, bands, weights, or controlled body weight movements. Balance and coordination can be trained with supported single-leg positions, direction changes, dancing, tai chi, or other tasks appropriate to your current ability. What matters is progression. The body adapts to yesterday's demand, so a routine must gradually become longer, slightly harder, more precise, or more complex. That progression gives the nervous system a reason to maintain connections, instead of merely repeating a movement it has already mastered. Research does not support claiming that one exercise prevents dementia, but regular physical activity consistently appears among the strongest modifiable supports for cognitive and cardiovascular health. It also influences several other items in this list by improving sleep, glucose control, mood, mobility, and the ability to remain socially engaged. If exercise has been absent for years, the first goal is not an athletic program. It is a level you can repeat safely enough to build from. Short sessions count, and consistency creates more opportunity for adaptation than one exhausting effort, followed by a week of recovery. Complex movement can add another layer, but complexity must match safety. Carrying on a conversation while walking may be useful for one person and destabilizing for another. Build the movement first, then add speed, direction changes, or a second task only when the basic version remains controlled. The fourth protection begins after the lights go out, but it is not measured only by how many hours you remain in bed. Sleep is an active biological state. Different stages support memory processing, emotional regulation, metabolic control, and restoration across the nervous system. An older adult can spend 8 hours in bed and still receive fragmented sleep that fails to provide the same recovery. Pain, alcohol, medications, frequent urination, restless legs, irregular timing, and breathing disturbances can repeatedly interrupt sleep architecture. One especially important pattern is loud snoring followed by pauses, choking sounds, morning headaches, dry mouth, or strong daytime sleepiness. Those signs do not prove obstructive sleep apnea, but they justify asking for an evaluation because repeated airway closure can disturb sleep and lower oxygen during the night. A sleeping pill cannot correct an airway that keeps narrowing, and simply going to bed earlier cannot repair repeated breathing interruptions. This is another example of treating the support system instead of blaming memory itself. When sleep is poor, attention suffers first. Information is encoded less cleanly during the day, and weak encoding later feels like failed memory. This is why a bad night can create alarming forgetfulness without permanently erasing stored knowledge. The brain may be failing to register the moment cleanly. Repeated poor nights are different from one bad night because the disruption becomes the environment in which attention, mood, and metabolic control operate. Regular wake time, morning light, daytime movement, reduced late alcohol, and a calmer final hour can improve the conditions for sleep. Persistent insomnia, severe snoring, witnessed breathing pauses, or excessive daytime sleepiness deserve professional assessment rather than endless experimentation with supplements. The fifth protection is the one most often reduced to puzzles, but mental stimulation is not the same as doing something familiar quickly. A crossword you have completed for 20 years may be enjoyable and valuable, yet your brain can perform much of it using well-practiced routes. Novel learning is different because it produces errors. You must notice the mistake, adjust the strategy, and try again. That cycle recruits attention, working memory, sensory feedback, and decision-making at the same time. The correction step is crucial. Repeating an error without feedback reinforces familiarity, while noticing why it failed gives the brain information it can use on the next attempt. Learning a language, a musical passage, unfamiliar computer skills, a new dance sequence, photography, woodworking, or a different cooking technique can all create this kind of demand. The object is not important enough to become a miracle recommendation. The important features are novelty, effort, correction, and gradual progression. Choose a skill that is difficult enough to require concentration, but not so difficult that every session ends in frustration. 10 focused minutes of genuine learning may challenge the brain more than an hour of passive information that disappears as soon as the screen changes. Progress should remain visible. A new chord, phrase, root, recipe, or tool gives the brain evidence that effort changed performance. Retrieval strengthens the process further. Close the instructions and try to produce the step from memory before looking again. Spacing practice across several days also forces the brain to reconstruct the skill instead of keeping it briefly active and mistaking that temporary fluency for learning. That evidence also protects motivation, which determines whether the activity survives beyond the first enthusiastic week. The sixth protection cannot be reproduced completely by a puzzle, because another human being is unpredictable. Conversation forces the brain to identify a voice, decode words, remember context, read emotion, choose a response, and adjust when the other person reacts. All of this happens in seconds, and no two conversations follow exactly the same route. Social contact also creates reasons to leave the house, maintain hearing, remember plans, move through different environments, and notice changes in other people. This does not mean that an introverted person must become highly social, or that living alone automatically damages the brain. It means that prolonged isolation can remove a remarkably complex form of cognitive demand, while also increasing loneliness and reducing practical support. The quality of contact matters more than collecting names. One regular conversation that requires attention and response may be more valuable than sitting silently in a crowded room. Reciprocity matters as well. Explaining an idea, asking a follow-up question, remembering what mattered to someone, and responding to emotion create demands that passive company does not. Volunteering, clubs, faith communities, classes, walking partners, family calls, and shared projects all provide structure that makes contact easier to repeat. For someone with hearing difficulty, improving the listening environment may be the first step. Quieter rooms, face-to-face seating, better lighting, and hearing assessment when needed. Notice how the protections begin to connect without becoming the same recommendation. Hearing improves access to conversation. Movement helps you reach people. Sleep protects the attention required to follow them. Learning gives you something new to discuss. Each pathway contributes a different piece, and the benefit comes from the network rather than one heroic habit. The seventh protection is one unified target. Preserve the metabolic environment in which the brain must work every day. There is no single food that keeps the brain young, just as there is no supplement that can cancel smoking, uncontrolled diabetes, severe inactivity, or chronically poor sleep. Dietary patterns rich in vegetables, beans, nuts, whole grains, fish, and unsaturated fats are associated with better cardiovascular health and may support cognitive health. The honest wording is important. Association does not prove that a particular menu prevents dementia in a particular person. But the mechanism is coherent because the same pattern can support blood pressure, glucose control, lipid levels, and vessel function. Food works through repetition. One perfect breakfast cannot repair a week of excess, and one dessert does not erase an otherwise supportive pattern. The practical focus is displacement rather than perfection. More foods that support vascular health gradually leave less room for patterns dominated by refined carbohydrates, excess sodium, and highly processed fats. Individual needs still matter. Kidney disease, diabetes, swallowing difficulty, low body weight, and medication interactions can change what a sensible eating pattern looks like. Smoking deserves special attention because it repeatedly exposes blood vessels to injury. Stopping remains valuable even later in life. Alcohol is another place where old advice can mislead. Beginning to drink for brain health is not supported, and more alcohol does not produce more protection. Medication review also belongs here because some drugs and combinations can worsen alertness, sleep, balance, or memory, especially when prescriptions accumulate over years. Do not stop prescribed medication suddenly. Bring a complete list, including over-the-counter sleep aids and supplements, to a pharmacist or clinician for review. Now the 7 protections can be turned into a plan without pretending that everyone needs the same schedule. Start with the weakest support, because that is where effort may remove the most unnecessary strain. Exhausting conversation points toward a hearing check before another memory supplement. While unknown blood pressure calls for several careful readings and a discussion of the pattern. A routine built only around easy walking needs an appropriate strength or balance challenge, not simply more identical minutes. Unrefreshing sleep should be examined for fragmentation and breathing symptoms, while a completely familiar mental routine needs one skill in which you are still a beginner. Several quiet days without meaningful conversation are a reason to schedule contact around an activity, rather than leaving connection to mood or chance. Food, smoking, alcohol, and medications all shape the same metabolic environment. So begin with the factor offering the largest realistic improvement. A useful week might include several aerobic sessions, 2 strength sessions, brief balance practice, 1 learning project, and multiple real conversations. The week does not need to begin perfectly. Choose one measurable change from 2 weak categories. Repeat it long enough to become ordinary, and then add the next. For example, schedule a hearing appointment and pair 2 weekly walks with a friend. Later, add resistance work or a new class instead of rebuilding the entire routine in one Monday morning. It should also include consistent sleep timing, and whatever medical follow-up is needed for hearing, blood pressure, glucose, or breathing at night. That is not 7 separate lives to manage. Many actions protect several systems at once, while each mechanism remains biologically distinct. A walk with another person combines movement and social contact, while a dance class adds aerobic demand, coordination, novelty, memory, and conversation. The best routine is often the one that connects several protections without making the day feel like a medical schedule. There's also a boundary that lifestyle advice should never blur. Sudden facial drooping, weakness on one side, new speech difficulty, severe confusion, or an abrupt neurological change requires urgent medical attention. Gradual memory problems that interfere with bills, medication, driving, cooking, or familiar tasks also deserve assessment, because hearing loss, sleep disorders, depression, medication effects, vitamin deficiencies, vascular disease, and neurodegenerative conditions can overlap. Brain protection is not a promise that age can be defeated. It is a decision to stop making the brain solve preventable problems with fewer resources. Return to that dinner table where laughter arrived before the meaning did. The answer may begin with the ear, but it does not end there. Clear sound still needs healthy vessels, an active body, restorative sleep, adaptable networks, human contact, and a supportive metabolic environment. Those 7 protections do not make a 60-year-old brain identical to a 30-year-old brain. They do something more useful. They preserve the conditions that allow your brain to keep learning, responding, remembering, and participating in the life around it.